Writing.
Someone who... Thank you. Good evening. It's wonderful to see all of you here. I want to thank you for coming this evening. We're very much looking forward to tonight. My name is Musa Mushabela. I am the Vice Chancellor here at UCT. I want to welcome everyone, staff, students, members of our community, family and friends, particularly the family of Professor Dick Ngambi. You're most welcome. They were just telling me some of the stories. It's incredible. I might share some with you, but we shall see. On behalf of the university community, I'm pleased to welcome you to this evening's inaugural lecture. Thank you for being here to mark this important milestone with us, together with Professor Ngambi's family and colleagues and friends, to celebrate his career and also engage in a broader conversation around education, technology, and values. Inaugural lectures are important to us in the life of the university. They invite us to pause and to reflect. We ask questions, we listen. We're trying not only to think about what our esteemed professor has achieved, but to also think about the journey that they've traveled and the remarkable contribution that they have made in their academic career, but also reflect on all the people that have contributed to their journey and success to this point. These lectures offer insight into questions that they have explored, the shifts that have taken place in the field in which they operate and research, but they also offer opportunities for possibilities in the future ahead. Inaugural lectures are given by a professor, but there are many people that accompany the professor in that journey. Students are involved, collaborators are involved, and all of them participate in that field to explore the possibilities involved. Let me take this moment to introduce to you the platform party tonight. I'm sure all of you know our DVC, Professor Elelwani Ramukondo. Let me also introduce Emeritus Professor Martin Hall, who will be the respondent. Let me introduce our acting dean, Professor Jaya Raju, who will also be introducing our esteemed lecturer and also introduce Stephen Marquardt, who will offer vote of thanks. I will not say much more about Professor Ngambi, but just to highlight that the topic for tonight is a compelling theme of technology changes what matters, but also what matters changes technology. This title captures the relationship that we often assume, but we rarely talk about or examine. And we are very fortunate that tonight we will be exploring it. We know that technology is shaping and reshaping what we do in education, what happens in our places of work, but also what happens in society more generally. At the same time, the choices that we make about what we value in life, in our work, in education, also shape how we use and develop technology going forward. It is this two-way relationship that we hope to learn more about and engage with tonight. Many of you and many of us already know that artificial intelligence and machine learning and many other digital tools have become central to our institutions. And even though we have to adopt them, we cannot do so blindly. These tools also reflect values and assumptions and power structures of the environments in which they are created, in which they operate, and in which they are used. So Professor Ngambi's lecture will approach these issues not only in an abstract manner, but it will also draw on real-world projects about a responsible way of engaging with these questions, the values-based innovation, and what this looks like in an African education system. It reminds us that purpose must guide our decisions. This is very important in the Faculty of Humanities, where many of our disciplines often ask how meaning is made through language, politics, media, and culture. Today, much of that meaning also is shaped by digital environments. If we are serious about preparing students, well, because we are serious about preparing students for this world and the reality that we operate in, we must understand how these technologies influence learning, influence access, and also influence identity. We must avoid rushing to digitize everything for the sake of digitizing. Progress is not just about adopting every new tool. It is also very much about locating these tools in the questions that we are asking and holding space for solutions that speak to our reality. To the family and friends, I want to thank you very much for supporting Professor Ngambi in his academic journey. And tonight is also a celebration of all of you. You, ma'am, and your kids, we celebrate you. And I'm not surprised that some of them are at Google and Amazon and computer science. Okay, those some of them are in HR, but we understand because managing people is also very important to the values that we hold in society. But I'm really not surprised, and your story and the story of your family is really incredible. Professor Ngambi, we're looking forward to tonight. Let me take this moment to invite Prof to introduce you formally. Thank you.
To our host, Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Cape Town, Professor Moshibela, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Elwani Ramagundo, to our esteemed speaker, Professor Dick Ngambi, Professor Emeritus Martin Hall, Stephen Markwood, and to our colleagues, family members, and friends present today, a very good evening to you all. I also bring special greetings from our Dean, Professor Shozi Kesi, who is away on sabbatical and currently traveling in Morocco. Her well wishes for today's inaugural are embedded in the introductory remarks that follow. It is indeed special to have Professor Ngambi's inaugural lecture. A scholar this well accomplished makes it extremely difficult to do introductory remarks, as there is the temptation to give a lecture on a lecture, and nobody wants that. However, what everybody wants is an excellent professor, researcher, teacher, mentor, who has earned respect and recognition in their field and beyond. Professor Ngambi's work is most current, as he is working on two of the key components of our existence in this institution, education and technology. It has been acknowledged widely that the 21st century is the era of the fourth industrial revolution, the information age, where information and communication technology has exploded. Today, we give lectures and have entire conferences online, completely digital distance learning programs, excuse me, and things that were unimaginable not so long ago. The positives of these developments possess their own risks that colleagues have flagged: low student attendance to lectures, growing concerns over plagiarism, or students simply tasking AI tools to write their work for them. UCT's Senate has developed a framework to guide the academic community's engagement with these technological tools. This emphasizes the importance of Professor Ngambi as an expert in this area and why he is the scholar of the future of UCT and higher education generally. Professor Ngambi has researched and published on ICT platforms such as WhatsApp, Facebook, YouTube, as learning resources for a younger generation of scholars. His studies typically involve young respondents committed to learning, but also products of the information age. Professor Ngambi's work is highly innovative and bold. It is rooted in creation and co-creation. It sees opportunity where most see danger. He is equally teacher as well as student, working and publishing with younger scholars, learning from them while providing mentorship, as many have praised him for. By way of illustration, his journal article on WhatsApp had 72 participants from under-resourced communities participating enthusiastically on a platform that makes communication cheap and therefore enhances communication. His paper on YouTube highlights the virtues of virtual learning environments in increasing classroom interactions when done appropriately. This was especially instructive during COVID-19 lockdowns, but useful beyond as well. His paper on Facebook is positive, encouraging the use of the platform as an integrated learning tool that is user-friendly, familiar, and popular with students. Professor Ngambi's work is proof that students can be engaged exactly where they are, not only physically, but also cognitively, working to bring them closer through inclusive and creative practices that are relevant to them and the world they have to work in. We are proud to have a scholar whose work reaches literally all parts of the world, travels in circuits beyond the traditional academic routes, is pioneering and advising governments on policy that integrates technology. The significance of Professor Ngambi's work can hardly be overemphasized in our emerging economies in advancing research through means that serve wider communities beyond academia. Professor Ngambi is highly respected as a researcher a stellar editor who has reshaped his field by ensuring the proliferation of publications from African scholars in Africa in the high-impact journals housed in the global north. His work is recognized by the United Nations and respective governments, starting with the provincial government in the Western Cape through his interventions, as well as the national government for policy redirection. As young people would say, Professor Ngambi is cooking. Indeed, his EtiLab has been cooking innovative ways of learning from Indigenous games to the latest available technologies for mobile learning initiatives in public schools. His pedagogical innovation serves the public through education, ensuring the future of our emerging economies. As an institution that he calls his home, we are extremely privileged to have someone of such high impact in the field of educational technology. As long as we live in the 21st century, we live in the technological era, thus making Professor Ngambi the most suitable teacher for all of us. It is in this spirit that we must look forward to this much anticipated inaugural lecture on technology and social change. Professor Ngambi, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I just want to, I do appreciate the kind introduction that I've been given. And what I really want to do tonight is to thank you so much for making the time to come and listen to this presentation. What I'll try and do is, let me just do that. I'll talk about technology changes what matters changes technology. I want to acknowledge the people that I've worked with, people that have supported my work. And I want to acknowledge my family, my wife, my children, for having been there to listen to all these ideas as they've been formulated. And they have not been tired of listening to the different kinds of ideas. Yeah. So thank you so much. I see so many familiar faces here. I see very esteemed colleagues, friends who have actually made time to come and attend this inaugural lecture. And my students who are here, and a number of other students who are following this presentation online. We know that technology changes what matters. Now, if you think about it, if technology changes what matters for you, and what matters for me is what changes the technology, which is changing what matters for you, if we repeat that cycle, technology is changing what matters for you, but it is what matters for me, which is changing the technology, which is changing what matters for you. We just have to repeat that cycle. You are not going to have what matters for you left, because what matters for you is going to be equal to what matters for me. Do you understand that? I mean, that's what this whole lecture is about. If technology changes what matters for you, and what matters for you is not changing the technology, but what matters for me is what is changing the technology, if we continue that cycle, what matters for me is what's going to start mattering for you. And that if we continue, you are going to lose sight of what even mattered for yourselves. Do you get that? If you understand that, you understand this lecture. I'll start with this African proverb. Not everyone who chased the zebra caught it, but he who caught it chased it. It's a very deep African proverb. Its meaning is deep. If you don't chase it, you are out of the game. There is no hope for ever catching it. If you ever hope to catch it, you must chase it. You must be among those that are chasing it. I came across this. Heads up, cross the street, then update Facebook. You see, when I read this, it was very familiar to what my wife would tell the children. Don't cross the street with updating your Facebook while crossing the street. It looks like a very, the one who wrote this was not a Gen Z. Because I would think, heads up, update Facebook, then cross the street. That's how I would put this. Because crossing the street is a dangerous act. Because what if when you're crossing the street, something happens to you? You would not have updated the Facebook. So if you update Facebook and then you cross the street, at least somebody can find your last post. Because then they can know where and what happened. If you want them to update Facebook before they cross the street, you want to put Wi-Fi before the street. So you need to put Wi-Fi before the street so that there's no Wi-Fi on the other side. Then they'll update Facebook here, and then they'll cross the street. It all depends on where the Wi-Fi is. I was amazed when I saw this. Because, with the use of technology like Google Maps, somebody must have observed that no one was using this. I mean, everyone is just looking at Google Maps. No one is using that after all. We might as well make use of them. Doesn't that make sense? One would have figured that out. My journey in EduTech started in Zambia, where I was born and studied. I saw there was a gap at the time when technology was just coming into being and many people did not know what was happening. I approached Sunday Times and they gave me space to write a column. I was a Sunday Times columnist. Some of the articles that I wrote include what internet is about, how passwords work. The future is bright for computer users. I wrote articles, beware of software package dealers. Computers are versatile machines. Computer crime now is prevalent. I wrote a number of articles. I took it upon myself to educate the nation. Identified a gap. I started writing a column for Sunday Times. A number of people at the time started buying Sunday Times just to read what I had to say that week. And that went on and went on. There was no Most of us were not on the internet. A number of people were just wondering what the internet was. I didn't call it social responsiveness. It was not social responsiveness. It was, but it wasn't, it did not have a name. I was not pursuing that. I started realizing that there was need to be an educator. You don't have to be invited to be one. Most of us are educators, but we have limited the confines of how much we can reach and how far we go. We have more access than I used to have at the time. When I was in Zambia, there was a time when there were lots of blackouts, electrical blackouts and power failures. A number of people were complaining about those blackouts. When you call the electrical supply company as to how long it's going to be before power comes back, they did not have an answer. I decided to investigate the problem. I had to speak to engineers, the maintenance engineers. I probed the problem, and I developed a tool, a software tool, which was called DN4T, a fault tracking system for maintenance engineers. I presented that maintenance engineers tool to the Engineering Society of Zambia so that they can validate the correctness of the solution. I then presented that to the Computer Society so that they can validate the accuracy of the method, of the approaches that I took to resolve the problem. I presented that to academics so they can validate the extent to which I used the methods to resolve the problem. And that tool was then presented to the company, and it was launched at the university. What you see in this image, the top image there, I was being interviewed by a TV journalist. And what you see here, the Vice Chancellor of the university was launching the software that I developed. And it was all over the news, including things like a computer whiz kid has solved a problem. It turned out that this was the first software to ever been developed in the country. It turned out. It was not a commissioned work. I saw a problem and I responded to it. When you think about that, a number of people, we have got skills, we have gone to a school, we have actually studied. The more we have become educated, the more the problems have persisted, and we don't respond to any of that. This is an example of how universities can respond to problems that are existing out there. That is why I'm giving you this as an example. There was an article in June published by the Cape Times on the 4th of June, precisely. They republished the Washington Post. It read, "No AI, no job." It actually outlines companies that are requiring workers to use the technology. They actually do say anyone being interviewed needs to demonstrate that they've got AI skills. No AI skills, no job. Washington Post, you see that article. The question is, for who do we educate? If our market is out there, we must be able to be responsive. We can't just close off and not respond. Responding does not mean just talk and debate. We must respond in a way that we can take action that makes logical sense to the challenges that we see happening out there. In my understanding, traditional universities are like these trees here. They are very fat on the ground, big roots feeding the tree, feeding the trunk, and feeding the branches and the leaves. The branches and the leaves have absolutely no idea where the nutrients and the water, the nutrition is sourced from. And these institutions or these educators have actually become very entrenched in their systems over time. My view is, and I see universities, progressive institutions, to be tilting towards a banyan tree model. A banyan tree model allows the branches to grow their own roots. The initial supply is given by the mother tree. The mother tree has got roots on the ground, and then each of these branches, they start developing their own roots. And these roots are firmly grounded on the floor so that they become independent of the mother trunk. That is where sustainability is. That is what technology allows us to do. That is what AI is able to do if we can harness it. Banyan tree. I'll come back to this. In terms of open scholarship, I have published and done work which have enabled me to publish data sets. The papers are published in the traditional way, but the data sets that have informed those kind of publications have been published on ZivaHub, which is as open. As of today, there have been 8,746 views and 4,700 downloads. These views and downloads are not just based in Cape Town. They're not just based in South Africa. These are global, which speaks to the need to ensure that we can enable access to knowledge, access to scholarship. And we need to do that. It is our responsibility to do that. I do see as a responsibility to do that. In the education technology program that I've had the opportunity to establish, way back in 2007, I established the programs and I've been teaching on that. One of the things I immediately noticed was the discrepancy between the voices in the classroom. There were dominant voices and marginalized voices. Some voices louder than others. What I decided to do, I wondered about the importance of listening to somebody's voice and how we learn from listening to somebody's voice. Right now, I'm not listening to you, you're listening to me, but I'm hoping that on some of the things I say, it's going to register in your mind. And if it does that, what will be happening is this. You will be able to take something from what you hear and update your schema, update your mind. That is learning. I figured out that if I can collect this, if I can capture these voices, because it makes sense, if I can capture these voices and make them persistent, let them live on, other people can listen to these and learn from them over time. What I decided to do, therefore, was to capture these collectively and create podcasts from lectures and discussions in a class and allow students to listen to those, design reflective tasks that are based on the podcasts. And I did that for over 5 years, consistently, for every class, for every lecture. And the students were able to listen to these conversations using their podcasts that they could download and listen to. That work that I did was published in as book forms, and there was a doctoral work. There was a doctoral work that was published from there, and master's thesis that he made from there. I should be able to mention that this pioneering work on podcasting, it wasn't just an innovation. It set the foundation for UCT's lecture recording infrastructure, a feature that now is a standard across the lecture rooms here at UCT. But most of you do not know the origin of that. When I considered the difference in the activity of silenced voices and marginalized voices, I decided to put together the different contributions, not just from the voices, but the contributions from the text, from different mobile phones, from different web communications. I developed a tool called DFAQ, Dynamic Frequently Asked Questions. That tool allowed students to engage anonymously to create knowledge. And we actually see here, there was a question about what does equilibration, how does equilibration happen? And a number of explanations from the academic staff did not necessarily satisfy some of the students. One student responded in a very comprehensive way. I don't have time to read this for you. Responded anonymously in a very comprehensive way, which we have here, which was the best response, which went far beyond what the lecturer was able to explain. This came from a student who would not talk in class, but because the tool enabled them to share, they shared that text. And the tool that I developed was actually empowering for these students. We actually see the tool was actually published in many different spheres there. And needless to say, the DFAQ was not just a small initiative, but it grew. It was used in health sciences, it was used in commerce, it was used in trade, it was used in humanities, in education, even before I was in education myself. Ultimately, this tool was integrated as a Q&A tool in a Sakai learning management system in VULA. So it was integrated in VULA and used globally. So the tool that I initiated ended up being used at a much global scale. I innovated a play space when I noticed that a number of adults were not as creative. I then created what I would call a playground for digital exploration. This was a play space called a digital sandpit, where most adults, students, pre-service teachers, and in-service teachers could actually come and play with tools. And all that kind of play would lead to some artifact. This is where the 8 Lab was actually officially opened in 2014. And we see the DVS, I'm sure you do remember, for some of you, you must be able to remember this, but it was actually launched in there. Over the years, the tool, the space, 8 Lab, has actually facilitated creativity and the creation of different artifacts that are currently and indeed being used by a number of those that have engaged with that. Each of those artifacts have led to an e-portfolio. And this is what one of the retired director of the Teacher Professional Development at Western Cape Education Department had to say. He said this was the first time a professional development training for teachers in the country that resulted in digital artifacts as evidence of innovative professional development approaches. It was the first to have ever been. He's now retired. He had actually seen a lot before he could actually make that comment. The digital sandpits have transformed professional development for teachers across South Africa, resulting in over 2,000 digital artifacts that educators continue to use in their teaching. And the students that had actually gone through digital sandpits were able to withstand when there was the pandemic, because they knew how to teach with the digital tools, and we've actually achieved that. Today, we have what we call the Open Educational Resource of Indigenous Games, which is a project that I'm so passionate about right now. We have collected a number of Indigenous games. In this case, we have Indigenous games from Southern Africa. Some of those you could actually relate to for those that played games when they were growing up. I'm assuming that someone here did do that. And we have got games from East Africa, games that we have actually collected from across the continent of Africa. There are 12 participating countries, 25 indigenous collaborators who are actually based in these different African countries who are collecting these games, and we are actually making sense of those games. I just want to explain a bit here about what sense making we are doing with Indigenous games. We have looked at the capabilities that are required to play Indigenous games. In this case, we have looked at the 21st century skills that are required as capabilities to play the Indigenous games. We have looked at the competences that one gets from playing the Indigenous games. And we've looked at Ubuntu as a competence. So on one hand, we've compared the capabilities that are required to play and what you get out of the Indigenous games. That work has actually begun to show us that when you look at 21st century skills by country, of all these participating countries, we have actually made some observation which is a bit insightful here. We've seen that teamwork is low in these Indigenous games in terms of the capabilities. Teamwork is seen to be low here. We also have seen that when we compared that with the competences, the Ubuntu competences, we've seen that solidarity is very low. I'll show you what we are concluding from there, that when we compare the 21st century skills, all the 21st century skills, except teamwork, which is lacking, and we've seen that Ubuntu competence called solidarity is actually slow in terms of the competence. We are actually concluding here that it can be that in Africa, with the Indigenous games that we have played, there is lack of teamwork, and which means that there could be a relationship between the lack of solidarity and the lack of teamwork. Maybe it is something that we need to work on, and we are really exploring that more. So we are seeing how we can be able to reclaim that. The OERiGA project has actually resulted in the development of a mobile app. I've designed a mobile app because I believe that the Indigenous games need to be placed in the hands of a Gen Z teacher who is going to have access to these games from their mobile phones. And because of that, these Indigenous games are now available on the mobile phone. And you can see that these spots here, they point to the games that we've collected. You click on areas, we can see that a number of games that we've collected are based in South Africa because most of our collaborators are here. And this is how we've collected these games. If one looks at You click on a country like South Africa there, you see the different provinces and where most of the games have been collected in Western Cape. And if you look at, you click on Mpumalanga, where we've got 14 games. These are the games from Mpumalanga. We actually can be able to see further on this, what kind of games are those? We can see the games and what kind of materials are required to play the game. The app shows the kind of materials that are required to play the game. We can also be able to share the different, each game, the location of the game, where the game is reported to have been played. We've got that on the map. So that the argument here is that a teacher with a mobile phone in their hands, they can be able to see that I'm teaching somewhere in this area here, and there is a game called Moruba, which most people played in this area, and they can draw on that game and bring it into their class because they've got that on the mobile phones. And people can be able to engage with the different apps. They can contribute the apps, the games, the indigenous games that they played themselves, and they can sketch them, they can draw them. And that work is fascinating. We actually see that this project, the OERiGA project, is not just limited to South Africa. I've traveled to Brazil, and I've actually seen, this was in Brazil, we actually see that in Brazil, they also have played these games this way. And these are some of the games that they contributed when actually was in Brazil. And we could relate to some of those different games. And I want to also be able to mention here that because of the focus on Gen Zs, we want to be able to reach Gen Zs just where they are. I've given you an example here of where we have the indigenous games on the mobile app. This current work, Teaching Futures, is actually focusing on why Generation Z is choosing the classroom job. I should mention here, the context here is that the Gen Zs that I have studied to do this work, this book, are people that have done a 3-year degree. They've got degrees in different fields, but they've chosen to do PGCE, to study and go and do a classroom job. I was intrigued. I wanted to know, what is it? Why do you want to choose a classroom job when you've got options? This book documents their stories. It is available on Take-A-Lot and also on Amazon. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Hi, Stephen. Good.
President Ngambi, thank you for that inspiring lecture. I'm extremely glad that I anticipated some of the things that you were going to say, so I wasn't left completely stranded in responding to you. Dick Ngambi's career at UCT, as he said, he had a previous career before that in Zambia, but his career at UCT started almost 25 years ago, where he reminds me, I appointed him to a position in what we then called the Multimedia Education Group, which was in the Center for Higher Education Development, of which I was at the time the dean. And I was remembering that and reflecting on why it was that we called it the Multimedia Education Group, which is quite a weird term if you think about it now. And the reason for that was a few years beforehand, we'd won at UCT quite a large grant, a generous grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation in New York, to set up the first student computer lab in the university on which you could actually use video. And just let that settle for a little bit, because before that, all computer use was text only. And this was at the time the revolutionary technology. And the really sharp thing to do was to call it multimedia education. And that was 24 and a bit years ago. And the reason why I'm saying that, of course, is that this illustrates one of the primary characteristics of the digital world that we live in. And I'm very aware of this. My primary disciplinary training is in archaeology. And archaeology is all about technology. And the thing that characterizes our age today is the phenomenon of exponential change. The principle that the capacity of computers doubles and doubles and doubles again. The other thing that's important to everybody in this room to understand about exponential change is that that's also the power of compound interest, by the way, which you will need to take into account with your bank accounts and your saving plans and your pension funds, all right? I once had the opportunity at UCT trying to extract money from Donald Gordon as a donor, and he had at the time started Old Mutual, and asked him what the secret of success was, and he just said 2 words: compound interest. Compound interest. We now have compound digital power, and that exponential change means why this thing seems so weird 25 years ago. My very first computer was an Apple II. It had the power of 64K. To illustrate the point about exponential increase to a class quite recently, I did a rough calculation of how many Apple IIs it would take to have the processing power of my current Apple 13. And the answer, by the way, is just under 1 million. 1 million. That's in a lifetime. We've had a technology that's increased in capacity 1 million times in our lifetime. And we haven't even got to quantum computing yet, which is going to take it all over again. So that's the thing that we're living with. And I think this is why Dick's work is so significant and so important. And it was fascinating for me going back and looking through what his contribution has been, which has been immense, by the way. I mean, he's very modest in terms of what he's portrayed as his career at UCT today. For a start, he has a string of successful master's and PhD students who have graduated under his guidance. He has made a huge difference in introducing courses in educational technology here in the school, and has made a significant contribution keeping pace with this exponential pattern. So in the spirit of the fact that we can't really predict these futures, and by the way, it's foolish to try and predict the future. The CEO of Microsoft said in around about 2005 and 2006, there is no sales future in the iPhone. It's on record as having said that, right? There are now 15 billion iPhones in the world. So predicting this exponential future is almost impossible. All we can do, as Dick has illustrated here, is to recognize that it's going to happen. And here in the field of education, the attitude of New York public schools was very interesting in early 2023. Remember, ChatGPT became available in November 2022. And in the beginning of about January 2023, New York public schools banned the use of AI in all schools in New York. That ban lasted about 6 weeks. They then reversed their strategy completely and embraced it and said, we're going to incorporate it into our thinking. We're going to incorporate it into our teaching. That's the attitude, in my view, we have to take with AI. The technology itself is neutral. The issue is how humans use it. And that's what we've got to concentrate on. And that's been the same with technology everywhere. So then reflecting on this evening, I thought, well, let me try and think, if I can't predict where Dick's work's going to go in the future, what can I pick out in these closing comments that really struck me as significant contribution? I want to concentrate just on 3 things, because I've only got a few minutes here to talk to you about this. The first one that I want to focus on a little bit is the slide that Dick showed us towards the end here of the work that he's done in games, Indigenous games across Africa. The paper behind this is a remarkable paper, which I would recommend everybody to read. Dick published this in the last year, I think, Dick, if I'm correct, in the African Journal of Information Systems. And as he said, he worked in actual fact across a set of 11 countries. He collected information on 185 different Indigenous games, and he identified the one game for the analysis in this paper that's played in one form or another in all 11 countries. What he didn't mention in the slide that he used there is that in constructing that work, he worked and his team worked with generative AI as a thinking partner. And AI was used to think with in this work, to work across this very complex data set and to develop the algorithm which could be used to generate the model. And that for me was a fascinating example of thinking with AI, which is something that we need to learn to do. We need to learn to think with AI. Why I think this is particularly important is because one of the defining characteristics of the past 25 years in the way that digital technologies have developed is that the continent of Africa, all 55 countries in Africa, is being left further and further behind. Okay. Now let's look at a couple of statistics to illustrate that. UNESCO set a standard of what the minimum cost of 2 gigabytes of data a month should actually be across the world to enable communities to connect to the internet. They've set that standard. The average across Africa is about double that. We have, as a continent, the most expensive access to data in the world across the continent as a whole. Here in South Africa, we're always aware of it, but across Africa as a whole. It's also extremely uneven in different countries. It varies extraordinarily. So we are behind on this race. We're also behind in the fact that Africa, in contrast to other countries, is very mobile dependent. 85% of all people in Africa who gain access to the internet gain it via a mobile device. Now that means that we need innovations that are mobile friendly, which is why I was struck by Dick's work of developing that app, which is so important. If we just depend on innovations in the North and the West, we are going to get very sophisticated, high bandwidth things, which we in UCT will be able to use because we're very privileged here for bandwidth, but which the majority of people we're targeting for education will not be able to access on their phones. And so we need a very particular African take on how that technology should be used and how it should be taken. So what Dick is doing is setting a stage for that. Now, when we think of AI, that is particularly important because, of course, as many of you know, large language models, which underlie generative AI, have the ability to absorb at very, very rapid rates, very large training sets. The legacy problem for all of us in Africa of not having enough access is that we are not contributing enough data into those data sets. So our knowledge gets more and more marginalized because it simply isn't there for AI to find. And so what then happens in turn is that the sort of thing that is presented to us as a curriculum, as curriculum materials, as materials in education and teaching, is more and more dominated by knowledge from the North and the West, simply because there is more in their training sets. So we need innovations of the sorts that Dick Ngambi is talking about here to enable people organically and across Africa to begin to get African knowledge into those training sets so it becomes competitive on the world stage for knowledge. And I just wanted to pick up that point because I think this is why this kind of work is so important. The second point that I wanted to pick up is Dick's commitment to open research and open access information. Now, he's very happily inviting you to purchase his book, which is over there, and you can buy it with SnapScan. And it's really worth getting. I want to get onto its content a little bit. But what I want to add is something that Dick didn't tell you, and that is you don't have to buy it, okay? Because he's made it completely available online as an open book, which is why I've read it without buying it. And now I'll buy a copy, Dick, because I've got to support the author, you know. But the point here is an important one. And Dick, UCT Press, which was resurrected quite recently, very importantly, as an imprint. UCT Press, Dick was the chair of the board, first chair of the resurrected UCT Press board, where he particularly championed the point of open access publishing as a matter of principle. And this, again, goes to this world we're going into, because we need this information out there. We need it. Now, any scholar here who has published on open access and for whom citation matters will know that if you want to get citations, publish your paper in open access, because you'll get 10 times the citations in open access than you'll get on a journal that you have to subscribe to. But what we're seeing at the moment is a quite insidious commodification of knowledge through publication. And I don't want to, it so happens, and this is not a deliberate dig at the School of Education because I happen to be here, but it so happens that the most recent book that I had difficulty getting access to was an edited collection by a group of very eminent scholars located primarily in the School of Education. This book was published 10 years ago. It's a scholarly book. The published version is about 220 pages. It's published by Routledge, properly refereed, and everything like that. The ebook for this sells at just under 1,000 Rand. 1,000 Rand. Now, why this is invidious is because every one of the contributors to that book is paid by universities. Okay, now, whether or not they get royalties, I don't know. I've never got a cent of royalty in any academic book I've ever published. But the point basically is that what happens is those of us in universities, we generate our knowledge, we get it out there, we want people to have it, and then we have to pay to read it ourselves. So open access publishing is a key thing, in my view, for the ability for us to widen access to learning. And I really applaud Dick's championing of this. And of course, where you see somebody who's really committed to open access publishing and they are selling the paper copy of their book, you are obliged to buy a copy to support their politics of making things open. And that's not a contradiction. That's a recognition of the commitment of publishing open access work. The third thing, and then I'll end, is I wanted to comment is Dick's commitment to teaching. That comes out very strongly in this book. This book, Dick, I think was just published earlier this month. Yes, just came out earlier this month.
Yes.
Yes. And so the book that Dick was talking about here, where he, in fact, engages with a number of emerging teachers who are about to go out into the career of teaching to become teachers. And he's basically celebrating and delimiting and reporting on their attitudes, on their view of teaching, on their commitment to what they want to do. And this I find to be a particularly encouraging experience. I found this one of the most optimistic books that I've read on teaching. Usually I expect when I see anything about teaching, particularly in South Africa, it is basically an apocalyptic view of what the future is going to be. I'm reminded constantly that a large number of teachers are retiring, that teachers don't like teaching anymore, that teachers have too much bureaucracy. This isn't that vision at all. It's a perception of what education is all about. And I think bringing that to us as a open access book representing many hours of work on Dick's part to collect together these viewpoints, I find that to be extremely encouraging in a world that is increasingly cruel and dystopian. So Dick, thank you for your contribution and thank you for your presentation this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, VC, DVC, Dick, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to give the vote of thanks, and I'm all that's between you and the refreshments. I'll try and keep it brief. When you're the last speaker, you're constantly editing your speech in your head because of what's come before, and it's mobile first. I claim some credit for that in the spirit. So I'd first like to start by thanking the people who have created nurturing environments for Dick, and first and foremost, his family. So thank you for raising Dick, bringing him up. And you should know that when he talks about you, it is with a quiet pride that shines through. Secondly, for the people who have created the intellectual homes and organizational homes, and Martin mentioned how he was instrumental in hiring Dick, the Center for Educational Technology, where Dick worked from 2005, and to my early colleagues there, Shahida Jaffa, Tony Carr, who's here in the audience, Andrew Deacon, who's always here, also here, and Professor Laura Chernovich, And that was some of the foundational formal years of Dick's time. And then after that to the Faculty of Humanities and the School of Education, where Dick moved into a new phase of his career and developed many of the exciting projects that you've heard about today. So it's notable that Dick's first instincts in his career that he described was to write, build, and teach. And I emphasize the build. And if you don't make the tech makes you. I think that's the answer to the riddle that we all had to struggle with right up in the front. But that sense of building has been there throughout. In the spirit of appreciative inquiry, I wanted to gain a sense of who Dick was as a person. And so I talked to a number of people, and I came up with this description of Dick as a curious traveler, restful and purposeful, and seriously playful, restless and purposeful, and seriously playful. And I'll go through some of those. So the traveler, both physically and metaphorically, intellectually, Dick has traveled south from Zambia to Lesotho, Port Elizabeth to Cape Town, and we're grateful that he's stopped here. There's nowhere more south to go, Dick. You just like settle in. But he's also traveled across disciplines. He started off in mathematics. He moved into computer science, systems analysis, information systems, applied educational technology, and moved into the School of Education. And so he's traveled across all of those different domains and enriched each one of them as he's moved across them. He's curious because curiosity defined his whole career and why he chose to do what he decided to do. And the way he described it was he wanted somewhere where he could continue to ask questions, to explore and investigate, and academia has been that home for him, and we're grateful for that. We do deeply regret that you left energy systems, because maybe we wouldn't have had load shedding. Dick is seriously playful, and the word that many people used is serious. And I think you saw that seriousness of intent, that seriousness of approach, and it comes across in how he interacts with the students, and there is no question which is not worthy of serious consideration and answer. But he is one of the most light-hearted, serious people that I know. And so he carries seriousness and intellectual scholarly rigor with a lightness that we can all learn lessons from. I'm struck by the nature of scholarship and the ways in which these biographies and stories that we hear at inaugural lectures illuminate what it is to be a scholar. And it's a deeply social and relational practice. Dick has worked as a grounded intellectual, someone who builds things to study, but also to be an actor in the world. Dick's chosen a form of social practice which extends beyond analysis and critique, a real praxis at the intersection of people, technology, and learning. And so Dick has spent his life building things in order to learn about them, but also to change the world. I'm proud to say I actually bought and read Dick's book. I'm less proud to say I enriched Amazon along the way because I hadn't taken the time to find the open resource version of it, but I did read it and very much enjoy it, and I commend it to you too. It is a fascinating account of why people choose to teach. And what comes across loudly in all of those stories is teaching is an act of generosity. And generosity, I think, shines through in Dick's work, and it's there in the enormous impact he's had on students across the years. And there is a Bemba proverb which goes, "Imiti ikula empanga," which translates to, "Today's small trees are tomorrow's forests." And Dick has been, in different ways, encouraging the creation of tomorrow's forests. On social media, people responding to the inaugural announcement, one person described him as a great, gentle giant, and another person as a genius. Professor Ngambi, all of us gathered here today in this theatre and online, we reinscribe this ritual of the inaugural lecture with purpose and joy as we celebrate your life and your work, and we thank you for being an outstanding scholar from, in, and for Africa. Halala.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.